I'm delighted to be here with all of you this evening, and of course, with my panelists on really looking at global solutions, global challenges, and global movements to solve these. Can you not hear? No. Okay, so. I think it's interesting because in the current times, as India looks at various issues, when we are sitting in Delhi and we talk about pollution, we look then at our global leaders, where climate change summit crucially coming up in Paris. What will be the solutions that are presented to us? What are the solutions actually for the young people in this room? And Shiv, I'd really like to open that with you. I know your focus is so much education, but when we look at education on issues like health, on issues like global poverty, on issues like climate change, where do you think there needs to be a paradigm shift in looking at a domestic policy and looking at a global policy?
Thanks, Sonia. I think the reason I'm so focused on education is because I believe that education is actually the foundation for all of these problems. Because we can solve problems in health or the environment temporarily, but if we don't solve the underlying problem of education, I think that problem will reappear. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think we focus very much on education. I think the Global Fund for Health, for example, has been a big success. Polio eradication has been a big success. So I think in health particularly, I think the global community has rallied because it's less controversial. And I think they've made big steps. I think the world hasn't shown the same degree of courage to the environmental issues we face. And I think education has been left far behind.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Vesu, come in on the Global Poverty Project. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about it. And again, poverty is seen very much as a domestic issue. If you talk about, perhaps in India, if you talk to government leaders or opposition leaders here, they would feel perhaps that poverty is very much our problem. In fact, there's always the dichotomy here of India giving aid to other countries, yet in some sense, many aid organizations are also working in India. How do you look at poverty as a global issue, as well as a very sensitive national issue?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, firstly, a bit about the Global Poverty Project. Our vision is in line with the United Nations, also with the World Bank, to see an end in extreme poverty by 2030. How we approach this is that we recognize that there is enough solutions out there in terms of technology, food, water, and so forth. It's about the distribution of those resources globally. So where we see that then is that poverty is a social construct in the sense that human beings allow it to exist, and therefore the only way to end it is that there must be a collective will of human beings affecting the systems so that it can no longer be in place. So in that sense, we see that the way to end extreme poverty, the call to action, is that we must all become global citizens. Which then goes back to the second point. Yes, because of this interconnected world we live in today, poverty affects all of us. You know, I have an iPhone, I think most of us have an iPhone, and that's made on the other side of the world, from where I live anyway. Or I'm sure this t-shirt's also made from the other side of the world where I live currently. So there is no such thing as everything is in an isolation by itself. So when we talk about global poverty issues, the way that we've currently been dealing with it in the countries that we've been operating in, they're predominantly in Australia, UK, US, Canada. The audience we've been speaking to is what is the unique role that these global north countries can play vis-a-vis ending extreme poverty. And what I'm finding very fascinating is, as we have these conversations now, and we're looking to work with Shiv to look about taking our methodology into India, what then will be the unique role that the East and Asia and India can play in global poverty issues. Yes, it's a very charged domestic issue, and I think that there are very real obstacles in the way, and it's fascinating compared to how different forms of countries around the world have addressed this issue. I'm from Malaysia, and my neighboring country is Singapore, and seeing how that country has in the last 50 years, I think literally it was a few days ago they celebrated 50 years as a modern country, how they've come to resolve those issues for themselves in the space of a very short period of time. You also compare to China and how they've come a very long way in 50 years as well. Yeah. Or in the last 30 years even, in terms of the massive gains that they've achieved. So the question now is, we have different models of development from around the world. What is the unique model for India? It goes back to your question on climate change as well. I know one of the workshops this afternoon we talked about briefly. India's in an interesting position vis-a-vis the world in terms of, probably started its economic development a bit later in terms of opening up reforms in the 1990s. The real question now is, what about coal and its contribution towards climate change? It's not fair for any country to have to restrict its development. But at the same time, we live in one enclosed ecosystem. So if India does want to go down this path that the rest of the world has, it may perhaps, unfortunately, both affect itself and also the world at the same time. But again, obviously, it's a very complex issue.
Yeah. It is that the coal and climate change linked to poverty, development and the link to poverty. But Rabbi Perron, if I can bring you in, when you look at global problems facing us today, as a world, what do you think is the greatest challenge we face, and what perhaps is the common ground? You think that leaders across the world from very different ideologies, very different backgrounds, if I would talk more about, say, the Arab world, Israel, India, Pakistan, the many different conflicts with neighbors, yet the commonalities that bind us all together?
First of all, I'm sorry that I sit with my cell phone. It's not, God not send me now SMS. My God is Narkis, and she translates me some of the questions. So
all right.
I have a problem with the English. So before the answer, I would like to say two points.
Yes.
One about the judge and one about yorship. We have in Israel now some virally movies that came from the United States, and you see there that any judge, a woman, sit in the Supreme Court, and any criminal sit near him, and he say him, you are guilty, and you will be 10 years in
live TV or what?
Yes, you know it.
Great.
And then after, maybe you show it, and then after a few minutes, when she finished to tell him what he will be do in the 10 years from now, he take out the glasses, and he say me, excuse me, do you remember me? And the criminal look at the judge, and he said, oh no, they was together in the same class in school, the judge and the criminal.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I show this view, I think that she can be criminal and he can be judge. They sit in the same class, in the same table, in the same chairs, with the same teachers. One of them are judge and another are criminal. And the answer is global education. That's very important to us to know that everybody can be judge or another thing, and everybody can be criminal. And the story of everybody is the story of education. That's about the judge things. And something to you, when we started the reform in Israel, I met the advisor from McKinsey company. And before we start, they said to me, Minister, you have to promise us only one thing, okay? Never say, in Israel it's different. Never say. So I think, and I said to him, I promise. I never say that in Israel it's different. But before we start, you have to know that in Israel it's different. And now, it's to your questions. I think that in education, in the global education system, something like 60% are global problem or answer. Same problem all over the world because we show the same television, we hear the same songs, and we go to travel in the same Facebook or Google or something like this. 25% are nationality issues, and 50% are locality issues. Why? Because 40% from education became from the identity. And you can't make education without identity. You can learn without identity, but education needs identity. And if you came from India, you have a special identity that's the Indian nationality. And if you come to Israel, you have the identity from Israel. So the question is how we can to do something together and to give a lot of honor to identity of every schools. Every schools. And that is the big questions in Israel. We have Arabs and Jews, and we have religious and seculars, and we have, all over the world, we have a problem like this. How you sit together in the same class and you give them, from this side, identity, and from this side, global education.
And I think really, Shiv, because you've been working so closely with education, the thirst for education in India is amazing. In fact, just this evening, we did a show at NDTV with just college students, first generation, who all live in slums. And I thought, what a change that is from just 10 years ago, and they're all in prominent Delhi University colleges, like JMC, like LSR. The thirst for education in India has been one of the biggest developments. And do you think we need to perhaps leapfrog our way out of the traditional education of rote that we've been giving our children for years, and actually look at now perhaps transforming it right from the classrooms, that's where we need to make like we leapfrog to mobile phones, even though we didn't have landlines. Do we need to actually leapfrog now at the primary stage?
So I think, in fact, the last 3 days of the conference,
yes,
we've had some very interesting speakers, education cities from Israel, Amplify from the US, talking about the latest ideas in education. And I actually believe, and I think many people, that I sit on the Global Agenda Council for Education with the World Economic Forum, and a lot of people believe that actually the confluence of broadband access to everyone on the planet within the next decade or 2 decades, which is a relatively short period of time, and the technologies, artificial intelligence embedded technologies in games and big data collection and the cloud and curriculum in the cloud is actually going to create a tsunami in the next X period of time that will actually completely change, upend the way people are taught and people learn. So someone can actually, you can imagine a day when someone on a mobile device anywhere can actually download at the pace they want, with the right facilitators and guides around them, and start learning at the pace they want to learn, at the pace they need. So it will become very much a personalized learning type of situation, which is actually something that will be very interesting, because how one can solve the problem of scale in a country like India, where we add 25 million children a year to our system that we have to educate. We just don't have enough teachers. So the traditional system can't fix the problem. So I think we should look for technological solutions, blended solutions.
The word tsunami is interesting because at least if you link it to, say, election results or changes we've seen around the world about a refusal to accept anymore a system that many people think may be broken, whether you're seeing it in Great Britain when you've got an interesting outsider candidate who may become the Labour head, you've seen it in Occupy Wall Street movements in the US, and other non-acceptance of the system as it currently is. Do you see, with Thomas Piketty's book recently, which raised many important questions, do you see the whole inequality aspect, something which we're going to see play out, whether it's on education, whether it's on access to health, whether it's in poverty as well? Do you think that's going to become a much more theme in our, when we look at capitalism or when we look at new systems which serve different countries than it has been before?
Is a question, do I think inequality will get worse?
Do you think it's actually, no, do you think the realization of the inequality and the refusal to accept the system or the capitalist system which seems to have dominated the world order as it is?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I can speak from my anecdotal evidence in terms of the work that I'm involved in at the Global Poverty Project and with our partners as well. I think it is, and you see with the Arab Spring and everything else you mentioned as well, is that surely it can't be sustainable much longer at the current pace it's going. At the end of the day, when you see what's going on around you and you see what you have, what you don't have, we're human beings in the day, and we intuitively know what is right. And I think that's the fundamental point to that, is that as we see the growing inequalities within countries, amongst countries, and there's going to be more mass and masses of us around the world, it's just not going to be sustainable unless we take that into our own hands. And social stability, and we've seen that all around the world. We've seen that with the austerity measures happening in Europe, for example, as well. So I guess in answer to your question is, I do believe firmly that if inequality is to rise any much more at the current pace it is, that's not going to be good for any one of us, and it's going to lead to great social inorder, which then goes back to the point that it actually is in all of our self-interest, ultimately, that we do have a fair society and a society without extreme poverty. Not only is it just a moral issue, but it's also imperative for ourselves as well.
In fact, interestingly, of course, India will be the most populated country in the world in just 2020. It will also be the poorest country in the world if you just go by the population of people who live in extreme poverty. So, Rabbi Peron, as I said, very different countries, very different problems. But when you look at India as a visitor, and when you look perhaps at other countries you've visited, what do you think are some of the common issues that you would look at from an Israeli perspective and say, this is what perhaps could be looked at anew or with a global vision?
You know, when I start to be a Minister of Education, I think that the problem about the gap between the communities in this area and another country, we will do it with differential budget. We give to this school 120%, and from another school 80%, because they live in the rich area and another live in poor area, and we close the gap between budget. Nothing. Now we know that more money cannot close the gap. When and how you close the gap? I have two ideas. The first idea is only when the rich men know that they have to learn something from the poor man became to him. If you think that you know all, and your school are excellent, and your boys are wonderful boys, and all the boys there and all the families there are so poor and they don't know nothing, and they not read the books, and something like this, it's never go. When you have honor, a lot of honor to the poor men, they came to the center of the country. In Israel, the name of the program is The Other Is Me. That's the first point. I think that it's a very, very big issue. How to give honor to the poor men. How to learn from them. When I was principal, I have a man, he copied the paper, and he make a lot of things. If you have any problem in the bathroom, something like this. Every Friday at 12 o'clock, he lost all and go to his mother. And all the students know that Tzuri is name. Tzuri is a poor man. He's come to here and he's worked for us a lot of hours. He cleaned the class, something like this. One day before they finish we finished the years, I call all the students, not a lot of students, 1,500, something like this. And I said to them, look at Tzuri. He is my great teacher. I have father. My father is 82 years old. And never I have time to go to him. All the time I said, I have to teach, I have to do some things, I have to go, I have to come, I have something with the mayor, I have something with a lot of things. Tzuri teach me that every Friday in 12 o'clock, he's going to his mother. And he is my big teacher of my life. Now, when you go to home, to the summer, you can to remember the lesson in math or science, and you can to remember that Tzuri go to his mother every Friday. That's I learned from Tzuri. So that is the first idea. The other is me. The third idea is you have to build vision to these students. I was in a wonderful class in New York, in Harlem, and they have 33 students every class from 30 countries, different countries. And in the door, the name of the class was, first class was Harvard. The other class, the name was Princeton. The other class, the name was Yale. So every student knows that 12 years from now, 11 years from now, 10 years from now, he will be in Yale, in Princeton, in Harvard. And every year, they go one time to visit this university. When you give them a dream, when you give any vision, to believe yourself, to know that you from Harlem will be student in Princeton. You from Harlem will be student in... So if we give these communities vision and dreams, hopes and dreams, they will be there.
Mm-hmm. That's a great story, really. But Shiv, that brings me back to something. When we look at global and the global community, sometimes the whole issue of our heritage, our civilization and lessons that we've forgotten from that ancient Indian solutions to issues like, would it be climate change, would it be looking at Vedic maths? Sanskrit, for instance, it became such a controversy which seemed needless, really, when you talk about reviving our pride or just the knowledge of our classical languages. How do you reconcile the whole global, perhaps looking at one solution fits all, to looking at what perhaps we need to know as Indians or Israelis or Pakistanis, etc.? How would you reconcile that?
So at least the way I look at it is the foundation needs to be global. The foundation needs to be universal human values and the fact that we are one human community on the planet. Because if we don't do that with our children, we start with division at a young age. Us and them, wars, conflicts, problems. So I think if one can create the foundation of human values at the base of the pyramid, and then as one builds up upon that, one should celebrate diversity and recognize the best from all cultures and learn about all those things. So that would be something that I would see as an utopian vision of a curriculum and a way of studying. And I think that cultures that celebrate diversity, like the US, for example, or other cultures where in higher education, certainly the US celebrates diversity. You know, it's unbelievable, the universities, how they bring the whole world to those universities and actually learn from each other and inclusive and have all kinds of systems to encourage diversity. And that's why there's so much creativity and so much energy in that system. But I think we make a mistake if we start with our heritage as the primary pillar because we create division. So I think we should start with human values and the challenges that we all face as a human community on the planet. Because if we don't do that, we are sowing the seeds for future conflict.
Of course, just coming back to that point I raised also on population and the aspect of climate change development which you had raised in the beginning. How much do you think the more traditional reasons for poverty, we're now perhaps looking at different causes, or we're seeing some of our policies of development which have actually led to greater poverty, or our models of growth which haven't worked when it comes to ensuring, say, equal opportunity on equal base perhaps of standard of living? Do you think perhaps when we look at global movements, we need to really look again at a global relook of development or how we classify development?
Yeah, there's anyone heard of Dambisa Moyo? She's a African economist. She was a bit controversial a few years ago, which came with a book called Dead Aid, and her whole premise was that a lot of the countries that have grown up in the last 70 years or since they left colonization has been depending on Western aid, and that's been a dead model. And she has this interesting talk, actually, you can find it on TED Talks. She was saying that perhaps China is now becoming the economic or the darling of African nations. Put another way, she says a thesis is that if you look at a lot of the Southeast Asian countries or look at China, they had liberal democracies or say more authoritarian governance, and they preferred that in order to have economic growth first. And her thesis is that if you look at the data over the last 50, 60 years, those countries with a higher economic growth tends to be from authoritarian states. And her thesis being that if you look at all even the Western countries we have today, they came to economic growth also through the same period of state capitalism as opposed to free market economy. So with that as a background context, I think if you apply that to somewhere like current countries, or say India, I'm not advocating that India becomes more authoritarian. I'm saying, well, it is the world's largest democracy.
The loudest democracy.
Yeah, I have seen on TV. I'm not sure. It's hard to actually understand who's saying what. That is the beauty of it too. I think I'm very fascinated to see how it will trend out in the next 15, 20 years. On the other hand, you look at China, yes, they have been seen as doing great economic miracle that no one has seen in living memory whatsoever, but has come a big downside too, again, with the environment. And now they're also coming to terms with, as they try to understand with the more free market principles, but we've also seen the last, 2 months alone, the stock market has crashed by 50% or 20%, and the government has tried to intervene in that. In the last 2 days, the UN has been devalued again and so forth. So I guess to answer your question is, there has been different models of development, and again, we go back to Singapore, which has celebrated 50 years, and you see that was done in a very different way too from here, in terms of a very authoritarian rule, but perhaps benign, benevolent dictatorships may not be so bad if you look at history. And I think under the current Prime Minister, that he's been able to consolidate so much power in Modi ji. And I think it's heading in the right direction to set added, perhaps, discipline in the country.
Yeah. That's an interesting viewpoint. Rabbi Perron, I want to bring in the role of global leaders as well, because often we tend to associate this with necessarily political leaders. But do you think that the Pope, for instance, has been very interestingly very vocal on global problems and talked a lot on poverty and how religious leaders must contribute to fight this as well, or must work towards it? When you look at global leadership today, do you think there's need for much more to emerge from different areas than perhaps just politics?
No.
First
of all, I don't know a lot about leadership, about leader. And I think that leader must to be someone that he is sure that he is not leader. And I think that one of the problem in our world is that in a lot of places, most of people don't believe to the politician leaders. It's not the same world. Until 25, 30 years, when you look at your prime minister, you feel something in your heart, and you say, oh, this is my president, this is my prime minister. I remember when I was a child and I saw from 1 kilometer my prime minister in Israel, it had something. It was wonderful for me. And today, when he says something, everybody asks, what does he mean? What he needs? He wants something? So I think that now we changed the leadership in the world. It came from leaders from the cultures. It came from artists. It came from people like Sheeb, that they want to change and they don't need nothing. Young people, we have a lot of movement all over the world of young people, and today the movement of young people in the world change more from the politician in the home countries. We know that today the young peoples together change the world. And religious, if I can to say, it's very dangerous, and you are from the, I say, we have a problem with the leadership from the religious systems, because most of them think that they know what God wants from us, and they're wrong. They think that God loves God, and it's wrong. God loves people. And they work from God, not from people. And that is the big problem with leaders of the religious system in the world. They work from God and not for the people.
Mm-hmm.
And the young people left a lot of religions in the world because they need the truth. And they feel that most of the leaders, the religious leaders are lions. So I'm sorry, it's only in Israel. So
I think that's another global challenge.
no, only in Israel. But you know that McKinsey say, don't say in Israel it's different.
Yes.
Okay.
So I get the
That's
message.
it.
I think we're almost out of time for the panel discussion, but if anybody would like to ask questions, perhaps to the panelists, that would be great. It's been great to hear their perspective. But go ahead, that young boy at the back. Go ahead.
So probably one of the biggest global struggles today is the struggle for world peace, keeping in mind that conflict is one of the largest causes of poverty in the world. So wouldn't you think that if we're trying for some sort of global movement towards world peace, and I mean this with no offense at all, just playing the devil's advocate, countries like Israel and Singapore, which have compulsory military service, don't you feel that that's adopting a very hostile attitude towards the whole world peace movement?
May I answer that? I was recently.
Of course, the good thing is now
In my country we have peace, so ask them.
No, but I think that the point you made was, yes, and of course, and the interesting is that now, of course, we have much less wars between nations. It's probably the best it's been in history, but we have conflict where you have groups like ISIS, or you have other groups challenging nations. So that's an interesting challenge, global challenge as well.
But let me just answer the question that you asked, because I think I went to Israel for the first time in my life a few months ago, and I read a book called Startup Nation, which all of you should read. And you've heard a lot about Israel, and it's a very creative country, and lots of things happening, and you hear about the problems, the border, but when you go to Israel, and I urge all of you to visit, you actually realize, and I spent a lot of time talking to young people, and it's not the schools that have educated them. It's actually that 2 years of military service where everyone becomes leveled. You could be in an elite school, you could be from the bottom of the pyramid. You're put into a place, you do hard work together, you build community, you build teams, you build a sense of creativity, and actually I think a lot of the success of Israel has come through the military service. Unfortunately, Israel's in a very bad neighborhood, and so they have this system that has allowed them to protect their national identity and keep the country safe. I think, and I wrote an article recently, that I think India should have compulsory service after school. Compulsory national service. But not for military, for education. It should be 2 years of compulsory education service. And the Israelis should teach us how to organize ourselves to do that. So everyone who graduates from school needs to commit 2 years to education. And education is a very broad area. It could be teaching, it could be administration, it could be labor, building schools, or whatever it is. But I think that Singapore, same thing. National service has been one of the things that binds that country into a community of service and action. So I think it's not a bad thing. The military part of it, of course, is disturbing. But, you have to be realistic about the world around you as well.
You want to say?
Yeah, I would also challenge the premise of your question too, in the way that you framed it. And I would respectfully disagree that war is a large cause of poverty. If I look at, say, India. India has 300 million people living in extreme poverty, which is almost a third of the world's extreme poor. And as far as I understand, it's relatively peaceful. And it's not at war, slight skirmishes here and there. So even on that alone, I don't think your premise.
I mean, perhaps.
Go ahead, Rabbi Perot.
Okay.
Perhaps you can
You
just
are the
answer.
leadership.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
I said only one sentence, a philosophic sentence, okay? You have to know that the magic of peace is before that it will be tomorrow. peace is something that we dream about it. If today we live and we have peace all over the world, we have a new war. Peace is something that we pray to him, that we want him. And every hour we have another war. War between two friends, war between husband and woman, war between nationals. So I think that we have to know that it's very romantic to think about peace, that tomorrow or something. If you see peace, it's because that all the people died. When people sit together in the same room, we have something, any crash. That's true, I'm sorry. Platon said it, not me. No. So now we have to change the situation in the world, to make a lot of peace, and to know that when we have peace, we have another wars. We never will be in the place that nobody wants something from nobody. It's never be. And personally, to your questions, I don't know the answer.
But Rabbi Peron, I do want to ask, because I think that is another global trend that we're emerging, a disturbing one, where we see a young boy from maybe the south of India, a young boy educated from England, young women who will travel to fight for a so-called cause. And there seems they've broken borders. It's not a cause which is a country, but it's some version of a holy war, they presume it is. And you see this across organizations and across the world. Have we failed our young people in some way? Because why do we see increasing, they're educated, and that's the worrying trend. They're educated young people, in some cases they have jobs, but they still go out there to fight this cause in the most brutal way.
In Israel, I think that the problem is, that we say a lot of time, if it's not go with power, do it with a lot of power. And I think that it's wrong. If it can't be with power, do it with love. And I think that today, young people know to talk peace, the culture of peace, not the word. They understand that if in Israel, Jewish and the Arabs live together, it's not to the Arabs, it's to the Jewish. Most of my friends think that they all the time have a ideological system, and they need to war, and they must to be true, and they must to be to bring justice to the world. And young people know that together it's more justice than justice. To be together and to know the other, it's the important thing in our life. It starts with students with special needs and the regular student together in the same class. Then when students, religious and non-religious, sit in the same class. Then students, Arabs and Jews, sit in the same class. Mm-hmm. Step by step. I think that if we sit together in the same class, and you're a man, another eyes, but a man. Hey, you have another color. Hey, you are with the problem with your hand or leg, something like this. But you are a man, like me. And you know what is to love and what is to be angry. Wonderful. When they sit together in the same class, you change the situation. Mm-hmm. And in Israel, we have more and more schools that we connected it together.
Great. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I think one more question, yeah.
So over the last 100 years, the education system has changed drastically. So 60 years ago, maybe just an undergrad was good enough and you were considered some of the most qualified people around. Today, even just a master's may not cut it. And what I'm trying to say is that every time you try and bridge this gap on educate the poor and get them up to a certain level, there's another bunch of us jumping ahead with our maybe PhDs and postdocs. So is there ever that how can you bridge this gap and keep it at that stability? Because they're everyone's trying to be the best of the best, and everyone's moving forward.
If I may address that, I respectfully disagree, because I think you're looking at it from the perspective of the top 1%. You're looking at the situation right there, that yes, that now more people are doing masters and more people are doing PhDs, but really the education system that was designed a few hundred years ago has not actually changed very much. It was a system designed for the industrial age. It was a system designed to create mass factory-like education for the great powers, England, to control the planet through organized levels of competence. The box you saw in Yotam's presentation, everyone was put into the box, and you knew what an accountant was, what a lawyer was, and whether they were in India, in the British Raj, or in Burma, or in Africa, in Nigeria, you knew the standard and the quality of what was being done. So the education system was actually designed for the colonial age and then modified for the industrial age. So I think that the problem is that that education system, first of all, reached the developed world and the top X% of the developing world. And the problem is that if you look at the planet as a planet, and if you look at our own country with the ASER reports, as in class 5, only 44% of the children can read at class 2 level and above. So the basics are not there. So I think talking about what's happening at the top of the pyramid, yes, all kinds of things are happening. I think the speed of change is changing dramatically. I think job stability is going to go out the window because of technological transformation. So the jobs, 80% of the jobs people will be doing in the next 30 years, we don't even know about today at the top of the pyramid. But the problem is, for the masses, there is this huge problem, and we need to address that.
I think final question of the evening. Go ahead. Go. You already got a mic, so that helps. Yeah.
So this panel has been based on global citizenship, and my question is a short one. So is there no place for nationalism or a vigorous national identity in the 21st century? Or do we need some sort of nuanced nationalism or something else altogether?
Rabindranath Tagore agreed with you, because he felt, he was the first to feel at that time, that why do we need nationalism and we must be open windows. But would you like to answer? Go ahead, because you're looking at breaking down barriers of nationalism when you have something like poverty to deal with.
A few of you would have heard me over the last few days that my grandparents are from China. I was born in Malaysia, grew up in Australia, and now live in New York. So I suffer from identity crisis from time to time. But I think that is a part of that, though. Being a global citizen, you're not tied to any one particular place. And I feel comfortable here, same as I feel comfortable in Australia, and I feel comfortable in New York. Yes, Australia is the place where I grew up the most, I'm most familiar with as a culture, and China, Chinese culture. I've actually only been to China for 2 days in my life. But I feel Chinese. We grew up in a family with Chinese values, customs, traditions, but I feel like I can coexist, both as a Chinese heritage and as an Australian, and increasingly, for better or for worse, as American, and hopefully as an Indian.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You know that my people, my national Israel, we was 2,000 years without countries, without land, all over the world, and we can't survive.
Exactly. So.
It was a terrible Holocaust. We don't live in our national, we live all over the world. We have Jews in Cochin, or in America, or in France, or in Mexico. And we can't survive. So when I came to my home, my private home, I have two kinds of child in my home. Some of them think that the national became to survive the culture. to survive yourself. And another child thing that we hear in Israel, because we have any story that we must to tell the world. If all the world sit in the same countries, we lost out a lot of stories. And we need the stories. And we need the stories. The world needs the Indian stories. The world needs it. And the world needs the Chinese stories and the Australian stories. We need to live together with different stories. Okay?
Well, Sundar Pichai in Google, and so I said that's a great way for global citizens right there, because Google, I believe, says that we don't hire people because they're Indian or Chinese or American. We just choose the best there is, and hopefully that's what we move towards in global citizenship. But thank you all very much for being part of this. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you.
tGELF, leading the change.